Class, we'll be looking at information processing and aphantasia. Our table of contents from our introduction, some definitions, the flow of information. We'll be analyzing a study. We'll look at some further help with aphantasia and see any findings that I conclude with. So the format of this is primarily for teachers, but also for anyone that wants to learn about aphantasia, and it's mostly lecture based, as you can see. And this form can be in a recorded video, but it can be changed to have quizzes or more interactable elements. But we'll focus mostly on the lecture format. Nearly 2 years ago, my friend told me she had aphantasia. Her name is Catherine. She explained what it meant, but honestly, I could not comprehend it at the time. In another class, Culture, Cognition, and Power Issues in Education, the subject of aphantasia rose again as we were talking about neurodiverse conditions. Interestingly, one of the patterns was that people with aphantasia tend to go into science and math fields. My friend followed that, and she's an engineer now, and this is her graduation picture. Through my research, I hope to better inform myself of her condition and prepare myself to teach a variety of neurodiverse students. This is the book by Temple Grandin that we reviewed in that class. What is aphantasia? Well, a person with aphantasia has no ability or a low capacity to create visual imagery. The term was first coined by neurologist Adam Zeman when a man came into his office claiming that he had lost all capacity for visual memory. He could no longer see images of friends, family, or places. Here's a representation I made with Canva of what aphantasia could look like, in a sense. And of course, not everyone with aphantasia would see words necessarily. As we can see on the left, there's a visual representation of a mother and two children. On the right side, there are words that describe the picture, but not necessarily in the same way. When we think of sensory input, we could think of stimulation towards our five senses, such as visuals and hearing. Sensory memory represents the first stage of memory processing. It's usually associated with vision, hearing. It functions to hold in memory very briefly, just long enough for the information to be processed. This is further composed of two parts specifically, of visual and auditory. So visual meaning related to sight, and auditory related to hearing. Pattern recognition refers to the process whereby environmental stimuli are recognized as examples of concepts and principles already in memory. Past sensory memory information will be guided to the working memory. Long-term memory can also come into working memory to help analyze new information. Rehearsal serves to help maintain the information in the working memory for a certain time period. A common example is remembering a phone number and putting the same digits to garner the same response. A more modern example may be to remember friends' usernames on social media. Chunking, the second process, refers to separating information into chunks. This role refers this as chunks in slots. Encoding refers to the process of relating information to concepts and ideas already in memory. Mnemonics is a method of referring to abstract things to make them more meaningful, such as creating them a story. Another specific method is to think of acronyms. Retrieval is the last process we'll go over. Previously learned information is brought back into the mind, either for the purpose of understanding some new input or for making a response. An analogy for this, that containers from a centralized warehouse are being moved from a hub location, which would represent long-term memory, to regional distribution networks, which would represent working memory to interact with customers. Lastly, long-term memory represents a storehouse of information. In Discworld's analogy, say maybe it's similar to keeping objects in a safe, though such objects or memories in the case may not be as highly valued or even have a negative value by the keeper. Struggling or different. People with aphantasia would describe their home using directional words such as right, left, up, down, instead of using imagery. In contrast to stating visual, people might say that their office is across the hall, some poster. And this is a visual representation of what a person without aphantasia may see. Then on the right side, you can again see the quote just saying right, left, up or down. 10 years after Adam Zeman termed aphantasia, he argued, people with aphantasia think clearly and effectively. We'll be referencing a co-authored paper spearheaded by Rebecca Coe. This study used spatial working memory tests and number working memory tests. From this chart, we can see that the spatial working memory test that the aphantasiac population roughly scored as the general population that does not have the same condition. These are some of their conclusions. That aphantasiac individuals use higher level brain regions to represent visual information rather than low level sensory region, and that aphantasiac individuals may have some form of unconscious imagery or working memory. However, this is just a theory. Anecdotally, aphantasiac individuals report very few impairments in daily life due to their lack of visual imagery. But what does that mean exactly? Well, one could say that having aphantasia really does not affect them that much, which is what the quote is literally saying. Another way of reading this study does not necessarily focus on their impairments in daily life, rather the experiments that they did. Some more information may be required. And I'm going to talk about their limitations. They note that there was no control for age or intelligence. However, they wanted to quantify that. There was a lack of a control aside from one control task that was not related to visual imagery. Lastly, 3 individuals' data was mistakenly deleted by the experimenters, but I do not think that it affected the study that much, despite the low amount of people in the study in the first place. Let's go over some advice for teaching people with aphantasia. This list is composed of many informal online elements from people that have aphantasia and adaptive teachers. This is because there's not that much traditional curriculum based on aphantasia. These elements can also be applied to students without aphantasia because more students may need different types of help. And teachers can give more creative writing and reading time for assignments because students with aphantasia cannot create mental imagery, so they may not be as inspired to finish writing and reading assignments. Secondly, students may not recognize symbols such as letters as fast as other individuals, but as you can see from previous studies, students can learn to recognize letters and roughly as quickly as other individuals. Including context so that there's more entertaining sense information. It's a story. This is not just for children. Adults could also, for lack of a better term, paint a picture. Number 4, including auditory elements. My friend Catherine that I mentioned earlier loves listening to music and would do so while taking notes. Including tactile elements, such as things you can touch, can be memorable in a sense. Linking, even acronyms. This could lead into mnemonics from earlier, and linking things with a story or a more of a traditional baseline of acronyms. Chunking is simply from earlier, and rehearsal with a combination of all of these elements can reinforce learning. So, what are our conclusions from this? Well, people with the same condition have different needs, and some may only suffer from a few impairments daily rather than seeing their condition as major adversity. A phrase I love is that students are people too, and sometimes they may not want help or help in the same way as that's a given at the time. And as previously stated, people with aphantasia may not be able to process the same information in the same way, but they can still learn with similar processes, such as chunking. I hope this enlightens everyone about aphantasia and helps us all engage with the students of the future. Lastly, here are all of my references used in the slides.